We are now ready to proceed with our business. And so, as a reminder, we are on item number 4, which is violence prevention funding for Hennepin County. As a reminder, this item is being brought forward for the body's consideration by Councilmember Wansley. I apologize for the disruption, but Councilmember Wansley, I will now recognize you to please introduce your item.
Thank you so much. No problem. I will ask if my staff can pull up the PowerPoints to guide our conversation for today. All right. So, council members, you all are aware that there's a motion before us today to consider appropriating $1.1 million to essentially move both YGBI and GBI programs temporarily to Hennepin County for the remainder of 2025. That said, if we can move to slide 1. That said, though, I do think it is important to have some level set on this conversation and basically, give some context around, first, the background of NSD programs, because I know that some of us are a little bit more familiar than others about them, and also for the public. So first, I just want to quickly go over some of the programs that do exist within NSD. Those are listed here, but of course, as I mentioned, they include both group and youth intervention violence programs, which we're considering today, as well as Minneapolis, which is our street outreach or violence interrupter program. Also, our community trauma response funding initiative. Also, violence prevention services, also known as or was known as the Violence Prevention Fund. We also have the hospital-based intervention program, also known as Next Step. Safety ambassadors, and that has an asterisk because you all know that is a pilot that is currently being implemented or will be implemented in the coming months. And then the behavior crisis response team, and that also has an asterisk because some colleagues are aware we voted to move this program out of NSD into the fire department this past December. I also think it's important to note that in the Public Health and Safety Committee last summer, we received a presentation update from the organization that carries out BCR, where they also flagged a number of concerns about the Neighborhood Safety Department and its internal processes too. But again, I think it's important to highlight just for our conversation. Again, we're going to just focus on the current proposal, which is to move GBI and YGBI out of this department temporarily to be in partnership or to be housed in Hennepin County specifically for the remainder of 2025. And I believe that the current landscape of NSD is just simply not suited to support this critical program. And essentially, this partnership will allow us to have the capacity here at the city, and specifically for NSD, to effectively focus on the other programs that I just overviewed. That's going to require significant attention to essentially restructure and stabilize in the coming weeks and months as well. So next slide, please. So a little bit more context on what is group violence intervention, youth group violence intervention, because I hear a lot of confusion out in the public and amongst my colleagues around what these programs is, and have heard them be interchangeably used with some of the other programs that I just talked about. So GBI or YGBI is an initiative that is highly focused on homicide, specifically gun violence and other serious crimes. Also, research has shown that in most cities, less than 0.5% of a city's population is involved with up to 70% of its homicides and violence. And successful YGBI and GBI programs have shown remarkable success throughout the country. In fact, in our Public Health and Safety Committee last August, we actually heard from national experts who has shared those success stories. Specifically, they outlined that there was a 34% reduction in homicide rates in Indianapolis, a 63% reduction in youth homicide rates in Boston, and a 41% reduction in violence for participants in Cincinnati. Also, pre-2020 GVI data also showed that here in Minneapolis, when the model was implemented effectively, we also saw positive outcomes in trends here, and those numbers are shown here on the slide. So moving to slide number 4. So concerning patterns and practices, again, despite its success, as I previously discussed, GVI and YGVI has struggled under our city leadership, quite frankly. And these problems have included a lack of data collection, lack of capacity and infrastructure development within the department and within the Office of Community Safety. Issues have also involved components of contract administration, and also it's involved and entail inconsistent partnerships with local and national partners and stakeholders. Examples of the systemic deflection and inaction within NSD have included also this rejection of resources to improve the efficacy and effectiveness of the department. That's also included in your packet, specifically one example in which council attempted to provide the department in 2023 during our budget cycle additional staff to support critical areas of need. And we were told by both the Office of Community Safety, specifically Commissioner Barnett, and the former director that those resources were not needed, and only to be found that they actually were, and essentially those were false statements that were told to council. The lack of utilization of resources that council have provided, included technical assistance, have also hurt this department, specifically technical assistance from John Jay's network of safer communities. And again, these issues have persisted through different leaders, despite council members raising concerns and offering collaborative solutions to support the department's overall success. Moving on to the next slide. And as I mentioned, the packet that has been shared with you all includes just substantial details related to the actions that council have taken over the past year and a half to really address these issues and to work with the Frye administration to get corrective actions made. And I want to just highlight again, like, us bringing this proposal should not be a surprise to anyone here. Again, it's been over a year of a number of council members trying to work with the administration and having no tangible results be shown. So that said, in December of 2023, and I want to outline some of those, the administration asked the council to withdraw budget amendments relating to expanding capacity within the Neighborhood Safety Department, specifically former OVP, Office of Violence Prevention, for those who don't recall, in the Neighborhood Safety Department, which it would transform into. Staff made formal requests during committee updates on violence prevention programs and highlighted that crucial infrastructure needs were needed for the department to ensure efficacy and effectiveness. So again, that is why council brought forward those budget amendments, specifically in the form of additional staffing capacity. Again, it was stated by Commissioner Barnett at the time that those resources were not needed going into 2024. Following that, almost immediately into the new year of 2024, council members were contacted regarding invoices, and then those inquiries immediately unraveled much larger concerns, where former Director Nelson Brown shared that her department has significant structural deficiencies that hinder its ability to be successful. Those documents are also included in the LIMS file, and also that prompted more follow-up questions that essentially resulted in Commissioner Barnett exercising what ended up being his legal right. He pleaded the fifth, and then essentially led to me bringing a formal legislative directive that this body passed that asked for more questions regarding what was going on with the management of the Neighborhood Safety Department. And in lieu of presenting to the committee, Commissioner Barnett attempted to send a memo which lacked meaningful information, and then That led to council leadership following up with the mayor. And then we did get a presentation from Commissioner Barnett in April. Then in April, when we realized there were still outstanding questions about what was going on with Neighborhood Safety Department and issues with service deliveries, I wrote a detailed memo that I sent to my colleagues as well, outlining still several ongoing outstanding concerns about what was going on within the department, including new information such as the department's non-use of technical assistance from national partners. That said, in May, Council President Payne and Councilmember Chavez met with the mayor and other leadership to try to talk through those issues and, again, get corrective actions moved forward. Next slide, please. Going further, summer 2024. Administration did not provide management plans updates, even though there was an agreement to do so. Then in May 2024, we received a summer safety plan from the administration that essentially we learned that no data was given in terms of regarding strategies that would actually ensure that residents were going to be kept safe in 2024. In response to that, Council did bring forward, and you all were here, you approved of that. Council brought forward summer safety funding in response to that. And we talked about the gaps that we were experiencing across the city because of the lack of safety services that were being deployed across our respective neighborhoods where we saw upticks in violences. And then that led to, again, ongoing issues that built up to this most recent budget cycle where in 2025, a lot of council members brought forward budget amendments to address the gaps that they were experiencing with the administration of safety services, specifically within the Neighborhood Safety Department and the Office of Community Safety. So with that said, moving on to the next slide, we know when these programs are administered correctly, they can have a successful impact. As I mentioned earlier, group members who make less than a percentage of our city can be involved in up to 70% of the gun violence and homicide. So ensuring evidence-based strategies are employed by professionals who have experience in this field is in the best interest of the city, of the Neighborhood Safety Department, and the Office of Community Safety. And last March, we even heard that be reiterated from our partners at the county. Specifically, we heard in the Public Health and Safety Committee that essentially we were straying from that model. We were straying from the implementation of what has been an effective model in reducing violence. And this has just led to us experiencing negative outcomes. And that was reiterated and reaffirmed specifically in the NYU Policing Project report, which outlines that the significant work that is needed is substantial to ensure the long-term vitality of this department. And in addition to this report, I just want to quickly highlight that some of the questions that continue to remain unanswered as we're moving into 2025, those things absolutely need to be prioritized within OCS and NSD, and having this time without worrying about what's happening with GVI and YGVI, because the county will be taking care of that. They will have the space to be able to tend to those things. I also want to encourage folks to look at the last AO presentation where we got the last update about the status of this department. And I just want to note that it was very interesting to even hear from staff and their lack of ability to articulate what an uptick in violence is. That is the current status of our NSD department and our Office of Community Safety. There's not even the ability to use data right now to be able to deploy resources to where violence is happening in our city. And this is incredibly concerning because the lack of internal understanding begs the question of how responsive they can be to potential trends in neighborhoods. And currently, no one in NSD was able to confirm the way in which they participate with referrals, especially with existing partners, or it's currently unclear if there is any formal relationships with partners who do provide referrals to address issues in our communities. There is just, again, so many issues that's going on. And I know I am not the only one who is alarmed to see Minneapolis being an outlier and homicides decreasing nationally. And this is a consequence of not effectively utilizing national best practices as it relates to group violence intervention. So I am simply bringing this proposal forward because I truly feel it would be irresponsible to keep this critical programming, knowing that we do not have a staff person within NSD who has the expertise in this work. And again, I want to reiterate, this program focuses on residents in our community who are most likely to be a victim of gun violence or who are most likely to commit gun violence. So a crucial program that is helping make sure our communities stay safe and remain safe. And I just do not want us to be in a position where we have a repeat of last year, where most of us were asking important questions and hearing from our residents why we're not seeing services being deployed when we know there are, again, upticks and increases of violence in our communities. And then we ask those questions to our leadership here and receiving partial and incomplete answers. And then council members having to use their budget markups as a fail-safe because we don't know how our neighborhood safety department deploys its resources or how they're making decisions to essentially keep our residents safe. We should not put ourselves in that position again when we know it can be prevented through actions like this and through actions where we're supported through partners like those across the street at Hennepin County. So I will ask my colleagues to support this. This is a temporary solution that significantly benefits both the city and the public. The county is stepping up when we are having challenges, and this should demonstrate a strong partnership more than anything else. And I hope that we're able to see that and be able to support that and recognize the opportunity it gives us to, again, get our house in order, while also making sure that these crucial services are preserved and administered with a partner that has proven itself to also care about this work and be able to administer and manage it effectively too. So with that, I stand for any questions, and that's all.
Thank you for that presentation, Councilmember. I see at the last page of the packet that was provided today an amended version of the resolution. I understand that's the item that you will be moving for approval. Is there a second to Councilmember Wansley's motion to approve this resolution?
Second.
That item has been properly moved and seconded. Colleagues, is there any discussion or questions? I will first recognize Councilmember Vita.
Thank you, Chair Chuck Ty. I have so many questions. I want to start out, though, by saying that I believe that a former chief judge in the interim position as director of this department has a lot of experience with working in GVI and YGVI programs and just with community around the issue of gun, gang, whatever kind of violence. So I want to start with that because I really do respect the commissioner and respect the work that he's done for decades. And I appreciate him bringing that to the city of Minneapolis. Also, just for clarity, because I think we've had a lot of back and forth conversations about GVI, YGVI versus violence interrupters. GVI and YGVI services are not deployed into the community in the way that violence interrupters are. GVI has a targeted base of people that comes from an internal network. They are not people that are on the streets recruiting clients and working with people in that way. This is very targeted. They know who they're going to be working with. There are goals that they're setting and accomplishing with these families. So that is very different also. And then So this has been something that's come up for me, like just kind of what Councilmember Wansley said about the data, who's doing what, who are our partners, how are we getting things done. This has come up for me since the first day I had this come up in public health and safety as the chair of that committee in the last term. And so I've always questioned what are the specifics? Tell me who they're working with. Tell me how they're working with people. And I get really good answers from the folks who are facilitating these programs. If you talk to the people who facilitate these programs, they can give you the ins and outs of everything. The issue comes with when you're the chair of a committee or sitting on a committee and you're asking for specific data to be presented. I found that to be challenging, just to get solid numbers from people on exactly how many lives are being impacted, who, how, when, where. Those are the things that I've had challenges with. And one of the things I talked to former Director Nelson Brown about was, how do we fix that? How do we make this clearer for us? And she told me that the RFP process was going to do that. I had monthly meetings set up with her and the person before her, and we had conversations about this. So my question is, what happened with this most recent RFP process? Because not only was I told that this last RFP process was set up for us to succeed moving forward in this program, but that also that she had contracted with the National Network for Safe Communities, which is the organization that former Director of Neighborhood Safety, Sasha Cotton, leads, and that they were working together to develop this RFP, and that the selection process was legit, and that protections were put in place from the lawsuit. So I'm trying to understand, what did some council members learn that I haven't learned that happened in the process with the last RFP?
Councilmember Vital, I'll just, before asking Councilmember Wansley if she would like to address the question, I'll just note that the body as a whole is not privy to details about the RFP that you're referencing. So I'll first recognize Councilmember Wansley if she'd like to speak to this, and then I'd certainly welcome Commissioner Barnett joining us and just sharing some additional details that I certainly am not aware of.
A timeline, Commissioner.
Okay, excellent. Councilmember Wansley, anything to add or?
No, thank you, Vice President Chektai. I was also going to share the same thing. As you know, RFP matters are all operational. So we aren't given information about details related to the RFP in terms of the nitty gritty, in terms of some of the pieces around data. I will note, Councilmember Cashman and I did request a legislative directive that this body did pass that did get presented on, and I believe that was former Director Nelson Brown's last presentation that came forward in the Public Health and Safety Committee. That was truly I can't say informative, but it was informative in the sense of we learned we did not do a lot of robust data collection around our programs. That might be helpful, but I would encourage the commissioner to speak to any details related to the RFP.
We'll welcome Commissioner Barnett from the Office of Community Safety to join us, and if you could please address Councilmember Vital's question.
Yes. Good afternoon again, Chair Chektai, Councilmember Vita, Councilmember Wansley. I'm trying to get up to speed here on what was listed. I'm the interim director of neighborhood safety, so I'm trying to look at the timeline that was handed to me. But I will say this real quickly. The YGVI RFP process, currently those vendors who scored the highest are in negotiation right now. So I think I can say that. For the status of GVI, those the RFP process for that, I believe, is completed, but notifications hasn't gone out yet. I am going to answer your question on the timeline, but I just wanted to say here's the status of where YGVI and GVI contracts are, only because you're talking about moving money, which would displace that money that is there for them. NSD developed, as you guys know, a robust procurement process in light of the lawsuit, which is the Coppola lawsuit that was settled. Also, new systems were prioritized as far as excuse me, the oversight in the objective evaluation criteria. So the process development began in August of 2024 with consultation with experts and continued through a careful, structured timeline of review, posting, and evaluation. See here. So August 2024 to October 24 developed the improvement RFP process. November to January was a thorough proposal review and selection process. January 21st of 2025, non-select notices were sent out to vendors in February. So this month of 2025 is when the proposal is brought, but not through our normal process. So just from August up until now, hopefully that gives you some timelines there.
It does. Thank you. Because I was having conversations with the director on like the shift in how the process was going to happen. I don't remember the timeline in which she said like selection or notifications would happen. I think it's just important for us to talk about like this was a process that's happened over a period of time. This wasn't like somebody just selected a group of people, that it actually was a process that got put into practice.
If I could add just one important note, Chair Chuktai, Council Member Vita, 2 weeks ago, we did do a training with the National Network for Safe Communities. It was a day-and-a-half training in which many of our partners were present in that training to reset us, because some people are new, some people have been through the training before, and just to level set us going forward and what's required. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Also, just another question. So this summer, we gave the groups in YGVI and GVI and some other groups additional funding. What was happening in the department that, like, we extended the contracts out at the time, right, till March or something like that. We got the contracts extended to go through the RFP period. I mean, I'm familiar with some folks' concerns, but I'm trying to understand what has happened that it's like move all the money out and send it somewhere else because this isn't going to work out. And then the second piece to that is, what about all the other programs that were listed on that first slide in this? But the first question is really about what's happened in between now and when we gave them additional money because it was going well, they needed to do more, they had different plans to do more, and we were all supportive of that. I really don't understand what's happened.
I have two people here from Department of Neighborhood Safety who can probably answer that question specifically, so I'll let them talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Shanique Rumecki, Associate Director of Compliance. So the RFP process is pretty extensive. We always say have a minimum of 6 months, right, from the drafting phase until the contracts are fully executed. The department has to work collaboratively with other, stakeholders in the RFP process, PRC review, the city attorney. As Commissioner Barnett mentioned, we started planning these RFPs since August 2024. It required 2 months of planning, meetings with Hennepin County, meetings with NNSC, the program manager, even some conversations with incumbent vendors. We had to extend these contracts until March 31st, 2025 to allow more time for the RFP process to run its course. And so that's the explanation as to why we came back asking for an extension to their current contracts. Within the city, the procurement process, if an RFP is issued and multiple vendors are selected, contracts have to go up to a maximum of 3 years. if an RFP is issued and only one vendor is selected, RFPs are allowed to go up to 5 years. And so with this process, we're coming to the end of that time for these contracts, and so we had to go for an RFP. And so we needed the additional time just to have conversation with stakeholders, ensure that we're engaging in NSC, who were a part of the drafting phase. NSC was also a part of the review process, and they were also a part of the negotiations that are currently happening.
So the extension was more technical to help out with making sure the process was legit versus just saying, let's give these groups more money to buy time. It was really about like making sure that it was a flushed out, legit process.
Correct.
Did you all hear any? I'm sorry if it feels like I've kind of put folks on trial here, but it's just questions. Did you all hear things like, don't do this RFP right now? Was there anyone saying, don't put the RFP out right now, it's a bad time for it? Or like what was being talked about internally for the RFP? Because I knew that the RFP was going out and I was excited about it, and the former director was super proud about it. So like, were you all hearing things about like it's a bad idea to put an RFP out, or like this process isn't good? Like what was happening internally?
Yeah, so there has been like ongoing conversations about the process. And so we knew that it was important not to recycle RFPs. To have a successful RFP, it starts with having conversations with the stakeholders that are important in ensuring that we're asking the right information. And so, not to my knowledge, there was conversations about this specific RFP, but the overall process, right? Vendors do sometimes struggle with navigating that process. And so it's important for us to not only just ask for information for the sake of asking it, but ensuring that, again, we're working with all the stakeholders, all the parties that are needed to ensure that we're asking for the right information, having the right criteria, and following that GVI model to ensure that we're getting the right people to apply and that the selection process is fair, but also gets the vendors who are capable of doing the work.
And then the last question for now is, so the process, the entire process of putting the RFP, who were all the partners that were a part of the process from the starting of writing the new RFP to getting it out?
Yeah. So I joined Neighborhood Safety end of July 2024. And so right away we knew that we had to start the RFP process because, again, it takes a minimum of 6 months. I know it sounds pretty extensive, but it does, right? And so my first conversation started with the program manager at the time, who's no longer with the city, trying to understand what are some of the complaints from the vendors? How can we improve the RFP? Then we transitioned to having conversations with Hennepin County. Alyssa Benson, I don't want to really throw out names, but Alyssa Benson with Hennepin County Probation, she was also instrumental in revising the RFP, going through every single page and ensuring that information is accurate and aligns with the work that we want to get done. I also had several conversations and phone calls with NNSC, Eric Johnson, Isabel, Samantha,
Can you name
Laurie.
the agency and not use like
Oh,
the
I'm
acronym,
sorry.
please?
I apologize. NNSC, National Network of Safe Communities, multiple staff, a part of that team, had conversations. One of the important pieces of the RFP that they provided was the importance of community asset mapping, which was missing from previous iterations. And so they were instrumental in that as well. The RFP also has to go through the PRC committee, that they ensure that the language is not restrictive in the RFP. We also work closely with the city attorney's office to ensure that there weren't any factors in the RFP that would limit participation, but also that we're adhering to the procurement policy, the city policy. And then that's the group that was a part of the process.
Okay.
Oh, and I also had an extensive conversation with one of the incumbent vendors trying to understand what are some of the challenges, because we were not close to contract closeout where these conversations typically happen, but it's important to also get feedback from the incumbent vendors to understand what are some of the challenges, how can we improve this process, what are some of the difficulties, and how can we be proactive to not have those things happen again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Council Member. Next, I will recognize Vice Chair Koski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a few questions here. I think my first question actually was just answered. I was hoping to know what stage is the city currently in regarding our contracts. So my understanding is that we're in negotiations with YGVI and we're complete, but with no notifications out with GVI. If that's not correct, please someone correct me. But my next question is, can you clarify how much of the funding included in the legislative directive for the GVI, YGVI is currently allocated in the city's budget versus how much is contingent on securing grants or other external funding?
Welcome back.
Chair Chugtai and Council, the first answer is all of the money is through general fund for that. And then can you repeat, please, the second part?
So it's currently allocated in the city's budget through the general fund versus how much is contingent on securing grants or other external funding?
Currently, none of it is through external funding or securing grants.
It's about 3 other percent. I don't have the notes in front of me, but I do know that it's a combination of both general funds and other grants. But it's a mixture because we really had to figure out how to pull money from places to really make up the funds for this program, for these 2 programs.
Okay. Just for these 2 programs, up to the just over $1 million.
So I'm not sure if I can share the exact amount that we have allocated.
We can respond in a memo, a follow-up memo.
Okay, we can add that
Vice Chair, just real quick, if you'll repeat the question so our clerks can note that for follow-up. My understanding is can you just give a breakdown of the total amount allocated for gun violence, or for GVI and YGVI? What are the sources of the allocation? General fund, external sources, et cetera?
Correct. And then, following on, how much funding has already been allocated or committed under the city's administration this budget year? Has anything for this budget year?
We can follow up as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And then, are there any existing GVI and YGVI contracts?
Yes, there is.
And so, how would those existing contracts under the city's administration be handled? And would they be transferred, rebid, or renegotiated if we went through this process?
And so under this new process, it's basically reset in the process with the RFP. Again, these contracts have ran the maximum contract cycle that's allowed within the city's procurement policy. And so the vendors that are selected under this RFP will continue the services for both programs. And so incumbent vendors, their contracts will end March 31st, 2025.
Okay. And then, but if we were to shift this funding to the county, how would the current contracts, how would then they be administered? What would that process look like? And how would we do that transfer?
If the money is transferred, we would finish out the current contracts, and then services would cease. There would no longer be GVI services. So we would, under the current contract negotiations, the new contracts would start April 1st.
Okay.
That would not happen if the funds were transferred.
Okay. They would not happen that we know of at the moment.
Correct.
Because we're
if the money is transferred.
Okay. And so that actually bodes into my next question about if the programs remained under the city administration, when would they be fully operational?
They've never ceased to be operational. All of these programs are currently operational. GVI and YGVI within the city of Minneapolis is currently going and has not ever ceased, and there is no plan of ceasing them. The contracts were strategically placed in time so that there would be no interruption in service. So the old contracts are ending, or the current contracts that are currently being used end March 31st, and the new ones would begin that are currently under negotiations April 1st. So there would be no interruption in service if the funds stay with NSD.
Okay, no interruption in service, but potentially different vendors that have been selected that were from our previous year, and then now starting in April, there may be a shift and change of who the vendors are.
That is correct. That could potentially be.
Okay. So if these programs were to be moved to the county, would there be a gap in services during the transition? And if so, how long?
There would have to be an interruption in services. I don't know how long. Currently, Hennepin County does not have a GVI program. One would have to be started. So there would have to be an interruption in services, and I don't know what that would look like.
Okay, so you're unsure of when they would be operational. Okay. You talked a little bit about the city having conversations with vendors. Can you go a little bit deeper on that? About, are these formal or informal outreach to vendors? You mentioned one vendor, so I'm just wondering, have you talked to multiple vendors, and what does that look like?
Yeah, so during the RFP planning stage, I had a conversation with one vendor, and it was very informal, and it was mostly surrounding the expenses. And as you know, the conversations are on the public purpose doctrine. So at the time, the conversations were around that topic to have an understanding of how can we mitigate some of the challenges moving forward with that expectation under the new contract. So it was less about, the criterias in the RFP or individual challenges. Of course, there was a bit of a segue talking about whether or not the city needs to fund additional things that might not necessarily fall under the public purpose doctrine, but the bulk of the planning in terms of the criteria and other aspects, we relied mostly on technical assistance provider to do so, as well as our stakeholders, our partners from Hennepin County.
Okay, and so what are some of the other challenges that they described? You talked about the expenses. Anything else that they described with working with the city? Well,
it's a mixture of feedback, but I do know that the primary concern was around the public purpose doctrine.
Okay. So do we know if any of these vendors have worked with the county before, some of our current vendors?
Yes. So I do know that some of our current vendors have contracts with Hennepin County. I've been in conversation with Dale Johnson when I started with NSD to have an understanding mostly around overlapping contracts, but not necessarily, the services that they're providing.
Okay. And do you know how their experience is? Do they have that same type of experience with the county of what you just described with the public purpose than with that barrier, or?
I'm not able to speak on that. I'm not sure.
So I just want to ask, I'm not sure if it is you guys to answer this, but a couple questions about the actual MOU that we're voting on or looking to do. Do you know what the timeline would be for drafting, negotiating, and finalizing the MOU between the city and the county?
No, I don't know what the timeline for that would look like. I don't think that process has begun at all. I don't know who the players in that conversation would be, so I don't know what that timeline process would look like.
Okay. My next question is about the MOU, so might not be able to answer this, but I'm just wondering if the MOU, can it establish a formal oversight role for the city requiring regular reporting on program outcomes, funding use, and service delivery, while also ensuring transparency and accountability in how the county administers the programs?
Again, I'm unsure of the answer to that question.
Vice Chair Koski, would you like to see if Council Member Wansley or perhaps Deputy City Attorney Nielsen might have some additional thoughts?
Both would be great
to chime in with?
Thank you, Chair Chuckthai. So this is actually where part two of the motion really gets at some of the questions that Vice Chair Koski is raising. And we developed this language actually in conjunction with City Attorney Abelson. And specifically, this is based off of prior agreements that we've developed with other government agencies like the county, and we were very intentional about saying we have to develop this, the release of this dollars contingent upon an agreement with the county, and having some clear provisions that basically council is asking to be incorporated in that agreement. And for that agreement, of course, having to come back before council for approval. So those provisions are listed in here. Some of those provisions include, of course, a transition plan to address some of the things that you highlighted around avoiding disruption in service. Also, a timeline to highlight when a completion of transfer of services will be completed. Also, a plan for assessment of outcomes and data, because we know that has not been happening within NSD. So we can be able to get that information over the course of 2025 from the county side. And then also information on how this agreement will enable and support continued collaboration between the city as well as Hennepin County. So those are the provisions that are incorporated in point 2 that, again, we worked with the city attorneys to be able to factor into any agreement that essentially they will have to get in the room with Hennepin County staff as well as our department staff to hash out.
Okay, thank you. I see this now in the second part of that. Just one other clarifying question, and maybe this is for Councilmember Wansley or one of you. You described that the county does not have a GVI program. I know they have a YGVI program. And so that seems to me, I'm hearing you like as a barrier of potentially this transfer. Can you just describe the differences and how perhaps the GVI program could be incorporated within the YGVI program at the county, or if they would have to actually stand up an entirely new program for that work?
Yeah, and this is probably one of the challenges in having a completely, department with new staff. But it's within Hennepin County, they have Safer Communities, which is outlined in their new, the letter that they shared with council last Friday, where they highlighted this is where likely they administer currently their group violence intervention programs. And YGVI is literally a spinoff of GVI. GVI is the original. YGVI is the spinoff of group violence intervention. So they already have the infrastructure for basically running programs that are grounded in this model. They also have a contract administration program or infrastructure because they're a government agency just like us. So they will be able to do the competitive bids and all those things in order to be legally compliant and administering contracts that's in accordance with the model of GVI as well. So as reflected in the letter that they sent us, they will be able to get these programs up and going, I believe, pretty quickly and without disruption. In fact, most of their programs already service Minneapolis right now. We've had them come to the Public Health and Safety Committee in the past where they've given these updates already and talked about the impact. So I think honestly, there's a disconnect probably, and I'll ask questions of our staff when we get to that part or for me to speak, but I actually anticipate it won't be much of an issue for Hennepin County to get up a robust program should this funding be approved.
Thank you. And then the funding is approved contingent on the MOU being addressed and approved.
And I just want to caution, only because City Attorney Dan Abelson, I don't want him to yell at me. He basically was like, steer clear of MOUs. They're non-binding. It was very clear. Agreements. So agreement. Yes.
Okay. And then will this agreement come back forward to the council once, this is step one, and then we will have this agreement will come back through after the agreement is negotiated with the county and the city. Is that correct?
Absolutely. In the first sentence of part 2 of the motion, it says any agreement with the county to administer the group violence intervention and youth group violence intervention programs in the city of Minneapolis for the duration of 2025 must be brought to the council for approval.
Great. Thanks for that clarity. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Next, we have quite a few council members in queue for everyone to be prepared for potential questions and discussion items. I will next recognize Councilmember Cashman, followed by Councilmember Wansley, followed by Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Chair Chugtai. I do have a question for you, Deputy Director Lakes. Last week you came in front of the AEO committee and gave an update on this department, and it was pretty shocking to see the YGVI and GVI positions empty. And so I'm just wondering who has been leading that. I know that there's many roles within the department, but who really does oversee the YGVI and GVI work that the contracts that the city has had this past year?
Councilmember Cashman, that's a great question. We have a lot of different people who are working on that. We have a member of the mayor's office who is kind of stepping in to facilitate the weekly phone calls that we have with NNSC and the group who is working on the work. We also have a member of of our Department of Neighborhood Safety holding the weekly calls with probation and with the vendors who we currently fund who are working on the programs. So that work has not ceased. We also have the member of Community Navigators, who's a part of the police department, working on an improved referral process for our referrals for the programs, both YGVI and then using that as a model for our GVI referral process. We also have a member of OSC who is also working on supporting the referral process.
What's OSC?
Oh, sorry, the Office of Community, or OCS, I apologize, who's also working on a business analyst in the Office of Community Safety who's also working on the referral process, and then myself, who is overseeing the prioritization of this work, as well as the commissioner who's helping to support the work, as well as the staff at NNSC who's working on supporting us in the hiring of a new position, which is currently, we're currently reviewing the resumes for that position at this time.
Okay, thank you. And so the one person who's in NSD that you mentioned first, maybe you don't want to give their name, but can you say what their title is within the chart of the within the chart of the department?
Yes, they are a program assistant, and they are working on facilitating the meetings.
Okay, thank you. And then I guess my main concern about this proposal is really that since this came up and I've been in conversation with various staff, there's been confusion that this would disrupt our violence interrupter work. And I really want to address that because this has been, I think, very clear that this is for GVI and YGVI, but I've since heard from 2 staff members in the Office of Community Safety that this would impact our violence interrupter work. And thanks to your help, I finally have violence interrupters coming to my ward at 19th and Nicollet, and I'm worried that that service is going to be taken away as a result of this, even though that's not the intention of the authors. And so I really want to get clarity on that because that is, like, for me, an ultimate deciding factor. Why would moving GVI and YGVI money impact the other programs?
Councilmember Cashman, that's a wonderful question. The amount of money that's currently being proposed to move is more than we were planning on spending on the programs internally. So we have a budget of a smaller number than 1.2 million for that work. And so moving that money over to Hennepin County would cut into other programs.
Okay, and so then can you identify how much money was planned on being spent on GVI and YGVI this year that wouldn't cut into other programs?
I can respond to that in a memo because we're currently negotiating that amount of money. I can't give a specific, but I can absolutely follow up as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Just, Councilmember Cashman, if I may, just as a quick follow-up, when did you know that you would be underspending the GVI and YGVI budget?
Can you define underspend?
I think what I heard you say is there's an amount of money, right, $1,125,000 that's budgeted for these 2 programs. I heard you say we weren't planning on spending all of it on programming for GVI and YGVI. When did you become aware that you would be spending less than $1,125,000 in 2025 on GVI and YGVI?
Through the chair, that number was never... I'm not sure where that 1.2 million came from. That was never budgeted for GVI, YGVI. That money was something, I don't know where that number appeared from. Our amount of money that we are planning to budget for that has been in flux based on the budget cuts that we had from the previous year. So when we are looking at what services we need to provide, we are looking at how much money we have and how much money has been earmarked and how much is underspent, and then we are moving things around according to how much money we have. So there's no underspending because it was never, that amount of money was never budgeted for GVI, YGVI.
Councilmember Wansley, where did you get this $1,125,000 number?
So, council members, thank you, Council Vice President Chaktai. You all got an email that we received from Lindsay Ehrman, I believe that's her name, from Neighborhood Safety Department on Friday in 2024, where she names, because I asked after much challenge in receiving this information from the Neighborhood Safety Department, that in 2024, the city spent $1.259 million on GVI and YGVI, and that's where I received that figure from. And then also they factor in what was spent using ARPA, because we wanted a baseline without ARPA, because we know ARPA was being phased out. So we used that in getting the figure to what was proposed and incorporating the motion today. So we used 2024 figures because we also know that in previous years ARPA dollars kind of inflated. So we want to get a baseline understanding of what would be going into 2025, because I originally asked for 2025 numbers, and also staff and NSD proved challenging to provide those information. That information, as they said, they were wrapping up their figures for this year. So I used figures that were basically provided by both staff and also by, essentially, because it took forever to get that information from staff, cobbling the contracts that has been approved through AO this past year, and the budget that we approved for NSD to get what you have before you.
Thank you. Going back to our queue, next I'll recognize Councilmember Wansley, followed by Councilmember Palmisano, followed by Councilmember Rainville.
Thank you, Council Vice President Chaktai. So I also want to highlight a couple of things, because I've heard this out in the public and also in the media points, and even amongst staff between Commissioner Barnett and what's being flagged here in terms of boiling down these mismanagement issues strictly to just contracts. And I just want to take a moment to dispel that a bit. And doing that using what's already included in your packet, and that being the memo that I sent out last year, where we outlined the topical issues of mismanagement. And those topical kind of headlines was, we identify issues pertaining to financial mismanagement, to a lack of compliance with guiding policy frameworks, poor intra-city and governmental coordination, and credibility issues with both local and national partners and stakeholders. Now, just to dig deeper into this, starting with the lack of compliance with guiding policy frameworks. In that memo, you will see, actually, again, using data, there was a scorecard from the Community Justice Action Network, Community Justice Action Fund, which ranks violence prevention programs from all over the country. At that time, they ranked Minneapolis program 39 out of 100. You don't just get that out of nowhere. So essentially, that was a pretty poor score. And basically highlighted also just complaints around just like partnerships with national providers so we could receive something higher, and to basically show we were following the model. So that's actually, staff, couple of questions, because I keep hearing about we're doing things. We got good things in place right now. And I want to note the reason why you got those good things in place, because of council action. So let's come back to the podium. Can you let me know, when did you put the contract back in place with John Jay?
Welcome back. I apologize.
Thank you. So I'm not sure of the contract dates for John Jay, but there's always been an existing agreement.
No.
I think, again, I don't have the exact contract dates, but since I was with the department, I've worked with John Jay, so I'd have to.
And follow up on that, can you remind me, when were you hired again?
July 29th.
Okay, of last year.
Yes.
Awesome. So John Jay was also a national partner when we're talking about contract administration, because it's very easy to pull that down to just our vendors. John Jay, a national partner, also was one of the vendors that also was found to not be paid. And we learned about that in this process too, of financial mismanagement, where we were like, oh, who is supporting you in meeting national best practices? And the reason why NSD entered into a partnership is because we literally had to do the restoration of that partnership and say, oh, it's important to follow best practices, because Lord knows we don't know what NSD is doing. And that's when that contract somehow finally got brought forward, and it sounded like we re-entered into a partnership with that. That said, can you also let me know, last year, when did the Cure Violence contract get reinitiated?
So I don't have the dates for that in front of me, but we did go before procurement to request a single source agreement with Cure Violence Global. That request was denied. However, we did receive an extension contingent on going on for a formal RFP. And so we currently do have a contract with Cure Violence Global. I do know that the current contract that we have started back in September of last year, and Cure Violence was instrumental with, helping to draft the RFP for Minneapolis. So currently, we're in the evaluation phase for that formal RFP that we were instructed to release, and we anticipate having a selection by the week of the 17th.
Just to loop back on that, because I believe Deputy Director Lakes, at our last presentation, I think it was clarified that we currently are seeking our RFP for a Cure Violence provider also.
So that we don't have interruption in service, we are. So we have a contract currently that expires. So before the expiration, we want to enter a new contract so we have that continuation.
And it's a possibility also that it won't be with Cure Violence Global then?
That is possible.
Okay, great. And you mentioned previously we entered into the contract with Cure Violence Global. Again, Cure Violence Global is one of the premier, well, basically the organization that guides how you implement group violence intervention work. You mentioned we entered into that contract September of 2024, correct? All right. Want to note that again. The reason why we did that is because Councilmember Chavez and I brought those partners to here in August of 2024 when we learned, once again, don't know what model we're following. People all over the country was like, what model? You scored 39 out of 100 on this work. What are you doing? Are you actually following this model? Are you following any best practices? We're not seeing that on the streets. What partners are you entering contracts with? Are they actually adhering to best practices? They possibly can't, because you're not working with the people who actually guide this model. And if it wasn't for us bringing technical assistance providers to give a presentation before this body in August, just so we can have a baseline understanding of what is it, there wouldn't even been a Cure Violence reintroduction into the city for September. So I just want to highlight that piece too. And to also know that there's a possibility we might not even have that restoration of a partnership with them going into, when is that RFP up for a Cure Violence partner?
So the vendor that's selected under this RFP will need to provide services that will ensure that neighborhood safety or the city is a Cure Violence site. And so, again, I can't speak on the RFP process to maintain the integrity of it, but you are correct in saying that there's a possibility that there might be a different vendor. However, NSD will work closely to ensure that the vendor that is selected is able to implement the Cure Violence model fully with the vendors that are selected under the current Minneapolis RFP. And so Cure Violence Global is with the Cure Violence and NSC GVI. So I just wanted to correct that.
Correct which piece of again, our technical assistance provider, because I don't want us to get into the scope of, again, we're talking about RFPs for vendors doing the actual Minneapolis, which violence interrupters work. We're talking about vendors who are helping us actually stay in alignment with the model to implement it correctly. There is a chance that the very organization that guides organizations across the country and how to implement it correctly, there's a chance that we might not enter into a contract with that organization.
Chair Wansley, that is correct. That is how RFPs work.
Right. Mm-hmm.
We like to make sure that whoever we pick is the most qualified. And so whoever is the most qualified to administer what is outlined in the RFP will get selected.
Yeah.
And if that person or that organization is the best, that's who we'll select.
And can you advise me of a single source? We've done single sources across this enterprise for subject matter experts, again, in any other capacity. How we were not to do that for Cure Violence for the very organization that guides the best practices around this model for this particular program.
Yeah, so we do identify that Cure Violence Global is the most equipped to provide this certification that we need. However, we have to work closely with the procurement department to get approval for a single source, sole source. And so the information that we provided was not adequate for them to approve that. And so we had to go through the formal process. We're bound by that.
Right. And the information you provided, the department provided inaccurate information for the single source process to move forward.
Sure. I don't think that's what the department is saying here.
Yeah. Okay. That's fine.
To clarify, we did apply for the sole source and were denied by procurement, so went through the RFP process.
And there's a chance, again, we might have a different vendor for Cure Violence, and that might look a little different for how we implement these critical programs around GVI, and that's nerve-wracking. In terms of also poor intergovernmental coordination, you mentioned you restored partnerships with the county. Can you let me know who specifically within your department, again, are going to those weekly meetings with our county providers?
Councilmember Wansley, can you remind me what restored context, restored from when?
I thought to Councilmember Cashman's question you mentioned there, because again, we have weekly meetings under GVI and YGVI. You're supposed to have bi-weekly meetings with law enforcement agencies, exchanges contacts, and the city was supposed to be there, and we were told we were there. So it sounds like someone from the city was there.
Correct. People from the city are there in those meetings. Then they have been continuously happening. The person who is facilitating and hosting that meeting currently, the NSD person, is, are you looking for their position title?
Yes.
The position title is program assistant.
And previously, who was the
Previously, it was the program public health specialist, and they left. And now we are in the process of hiring a replacement. And so in the meantime, we have the program assistant holding those meetings while we hire the next person.
And can you name, how long was the previous program manager for YGVI and GVI in that position for?
Councilmember Wansley, I'd have to get back to you. I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay. I believe former Director Nelson Brow, I already answered. It was less than a year. I think less than 6 months for that, holding that work. So we've also seen significant transition in holding that work in this department too, and the lack of continuity in supporting that work in partnerships with the county. Also, in terms of our national stakeholders, can you also highlight what is our current relationship with the National Office of Violence Prevention?
Councilmember Wansley, we have a contract with, can you, okay, thank you.
So we've been having conversations with NOVPN, or National Institute of Criminal Justice Reform. We were approved for a single source contract with that vendor. However, we're waiting on them to provide information that is required in order to enter into a contract with the city. And so we've done everything on our end to move the process forward, but there's still some outstanding documents that are needed from the NICJR team in order to proceed with a contract with them.
Sorry, which one? You mentioned two separate ones.
So National Institute of Criminal Justice Reform, NICJR, that's the name that they go by, and then they're responsible for NOVPN, so the National Office of Violence Prevention Network, which is the network that all the OVP offices are a part of. So NICJR is the proper way to refer to them.
Got it. Yeah. Remember that they have different divisions because they typically organize events under National Office of Violence Prevention, and they came to council separately as the National Office of Violence Prevention. So, and they also highlighted in August that we could partner with them individually under the National Office of Violence Prevention. Also, they came to the County Safer Communities Conference in May separately as the National Office of Violence Prevention. So one, to get a sense of if we also are setting up professional development opportunities with them, because that was another piece that was highlighted in the memo around, are we doing engagement with them, attending conferences, attending any type of workshops that elevates our staff's expertise and experience under this in partnership with them. So I know our last meeting, it wasn't clear if we actually had a status update on that. But I see there's a number of colleagues still in queue, so we'll make sure other folks get to ask those questions.
Thank you. Next, I will recognize Councilmember Palmisano, followed by Councilmember Rainville, followed by Councilmember Vita.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This has been confusing because our team here in front of us is saying we'll be changing providers potentially. They assure us that they have been changing the process, and yet this resolution seems to be a complaint that we're not high enough on a national list of our current vendors and our previous model. So I don't want them to keep doing the same thing, and they're showing us that they haven't been. Councilmember Koski was asking why they are cobbling together resources to continue this service. Well, first I'd say maybe because City Council cut half their budget for 2025. And they don't budget at a project level. So despite cuts from this body, they are trying to get this together to make this whole. They're not underspending. That's not a thing. They're taking away from other things. And the way that I look at the budget, it's a large part of their non-personnel budget for this department. 6 of us here are on the AEO committee, and I really appreciate Councilmember Cashman's recollection of it here. And let me add more. Last week, we heard a long, and I might have made a comment about it being a bit dry, but a long presentation from Deputy Director Lakes about the additional rigor about this process. Was it a bit snoozy? Sure. But as I pointed out then, it spoke specifically about contracting improvements, vendor support services and improvements. There are roughly 250 community partnerships, ongoing support from multiple different departments that work with them. One good question asked, I think it was maybe from Councilmember Cashman, was about our ShotSpotter review and how on-the-ground partners learn and know about ShotSpotter activity and the services that technology provides, and then can coordinate the on-the-ground work from people working on the street to help use that information in good public safety kinds of ways. Yes, the NYU policing project update we got last year found that our systems were lacking, but that review was done before or concurrently with the development and launch of this new system. We now have a transparent and rigorous selection system in place. I'm sorry that the author of this resolution is frustrated. I think we all are. I think we all are frustrated and want this to operate better. And we need to give our new system
a chance to work. Ms. I'm unfamiliar with your last name, but Shanique, Ms. Ruhamaki. Thank you.
It's a mouthful. Shanique Rumaki.
Thank you. I believe these vendor selections are public. It can be looked up or asked who had it in the past and who got letters of selection and are being prepared to be our vendors in the future.
So currently, the information is not public.
But those who were not selected have received their letters.
Yeah, so those who were not selected did receive notices of non-selection. However, the selected vendors, that is not public information as yet.
I see. So that's why this timing makes me wary. It sounded like from this discussion that at the next meeting we're looking to literally approve the next set of vendors that would begin April 1st.
Correct.
So there's no interruption in service on this side of the street. It sounds like some of them are not the same vendors from the past.
That is correct.
But what I've learned through this conversation and had suspicions about before is that this moving the money over to the county is a way to keep these contracts with the same set of people.
That's a scribing motive. No.
I'm saying it looks as though if we move these contracts to Hennepin County, I don't think it's a stretch when it was said in this conversation that the county works with our current vendors. I'll move on. This is exactly what this additional rigor and what we painstakingly took a lot of effort and a lot of time to go through says not to do. I was going to ask, where are the results for Hennepin County? Do we know that they're doing a better job at this than we are? But instead, this resolution we're discussing is to cross the street to the county, reinvent the wheel, and then come back here and be approved by this body. That is nonsensical to me. And that does not honor the work that we've done to approve this. And any money spent would have to actually legally go through all the additional rigor that has been built and explained by Deputy Director Lakes last week. So what is the point then, other than to keep the money with the people currently receiving it? I'm curious, what is the point?
Councilmember Wansley, do you want to address that?
Sure, why not? Again, the county has not been the ones found legally mandated to have to do anything around contract administrations. Like, they were not the ones sued. The county also has a competitive RFP process. So this argument that somehow this is our desire to exhibit outsized influence over the county's process to get contracts to preferential vendors, like, really entertain this for a minute. If we really want to do that and really follow what seems to already be a pattern, and trust me, it sounds like other council members have entertained that themselves here, as exhibited from the Our Rescue example of this past week. It sounds like it would be better to just keep those programs here and maybe introduce them or our preferred vendors to the Office of Community Safety Commissioner and shake a few hands and make a donation to the mayor. Like, apparently that's how things happen here based off of the Our Rescue model.
That is exactly prescribing motivation. Yeah. That's exactly it. Come on,
sure.
Chair.
Councilmember, let's please stay
I'm saying
to the topic.
Yes, you're right. Yes, absolutely. I'll call decorum on myself. But nevertheless, if that's truly how we wanted to do influence, you could just keep it locally here, apparently in these terms and conditions of our current Office of Community Safety. But the Hennepin County has clearly shown they have robust compliance measures, contract administration, also have shown to adhere to national best practices and models around GVI and YGVI, and the ability to administer these programs here in Minneapolis and deliver results. And that is the baseline. That is what is the desired outcome here, to keep residents safe. It is not about people's feelings. It's not about the desire to protect whatever people's perceived vendors are. That is not the culture that I think a number of us council members actually entertain, that has been cultivated here. So that's the goal of this motion.
Any further questions, Councilmember Palmisano?
No, Madam Chair. My point was that this will have to go through all the rework and all of the process of the rigor of the Coppola lawsuit and perhaps others. So we'll be reinventing the wheel across the street to come back and be approved by this body, and that makes no sense to me.
I will now recognize Councilmember Rainville, followed by Councilmember Vita.
Thank you. And if you two would like to sit down, it'd be great. I have some questions for the commissioner, please. And as I'm sure everybody can tell, I'm nursing a very bad sore throat. So I will try to speak clearly, Commissioner. But first of all, I just want to have an observation, and I want to apologize for the attacks on your integrity in your staff questioning. There's no place for that in the city on Fridays, and I'm sorry that this is happening. But could you, for the public, explain the public purpose doctrine? It seems like some of these vendors were not getting paid because there were issues, and maybe you could explain that so we understand what the public purpose doctrine is.
Chair Chuck Ty, Councilmember Rainville, I'm a former attorney. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to misquote the public doctrine, but I can tell you a little bit about what's happening. The discussion is really about public purpose and how we use our taxpayer dollars for public purpose. And so the examples that have been given to me by our city attorney in what is the proper use of the public dollars and what's not. So, for instance, when we look at GVI and YGVI, we have these emergencies where there might be a shooting that takes place and we need to immediately relocate someone and provide them maybe some food initially. That, my understanding, we could use for public purpose. If 6 months down the road, we still have that person as a client through one of our vendors, we can't take them, although we might want to have them do this, but we can't take them out for a birthday dinner or something like that. That's not for public purpose, but I'll return to our city attorney for a more thorough definition of it.
Chair Chuck Ty, Councilmember Rainville. Yeah, public purpose has essentially a two-pronged meaning under Minnesota law. You need both legal authorization that you can point to for the expenditure, and the expenditure has to be for a public purpose. And so that means, in real simple terms, there's a lot of caveats. You have to evaluate each expenditure on a case-by-case basis, especially when you're providing funding to individuals. And that's because funding to an individual money going to an individual it can, in large context, constitute a gift, a private gift, and it doesn't benefit the public as a whole. And so in a program that's created where you're using individualized interventions, it is very difficult at the outset to establish standardized categories of authorized spending and not authorized spending. You have to look at each expenditure on an individual case-by-case basis to make the determination. And yes, as the commissioner noted, there are some situations in an emergency situation defined broadly where expenditures may be okay in that context on an individualized basis, but would not be generally or otherwise.
Okay, thank you. So One other explanation I think is really pertinent here is the procurement department, the mysterious procurement department. So, and I've run into that when I've tried to do that, and I was refused because the vendor did not comply. And so, is it safe to say that if the procurement department is not comfortable with the vendor, then withholding funding or not allowing a contract is what the city enterprise is set up to do?
Chair Chuck Day, Councilmember Rainbow, yes, I would agree with that. Ultimately, working in city government, we are all stewards of the public dollar, and we have to ensure that public money is spent appropriately and legally.
Okay, thank you. And then my next question is, Commissioner, if you could explain how long has the county had their violence department, community safety? They're equal to our community safety. Are they not newer than ours?
Chair Chuck Ty, Councilmember Rainville. The city has had GVI for a long time. The county, I think, started their YGVI, I think 2022, but I'm not sure exactly when they started. I know the city has had it for a long time because of my prior employment of being involved with GVI.
Okay, thank you. And also, this is a county question. Does Eden Prairie or Brooklyn Park pay the county for GVI services in their districts?
Chair Chuck Ty, Councilmember Rainville, not that I'm aware of. I'm not aware of the county having a relationship with those cities.
Okay, well, I do not want to hold up this discussion, but I will not be voting for this. I think back to when I first started on this council, and Councilmember Ellison, I voted against this, but you had convinced me otherwise, that the funding I voted against all funding for this department, and you convinced me that the police department had 130 years to get their reporting and their act in order, and to have faith and bear with our city employees and get this done. And I think that's the course that we should say, that this is newer than the police department, but they're making way, and we should not farm out this work to the county. That's just not good governance. That's our responsibility, not theirs. And finally, I do want to call out Mad Dads and 21 Days of Peace, which seem to have trouble getting funding, especially under the older regime. They're doing the work. They work late at night. They're very responsive, and I thank them for all the work they've done on Nicollet Mall and in the Warehouse District Live.
Next, I'll recognize Councilmember Vita, followed by Councilmember Osman, and then I think we'll be ready to consider the motion on this question.
Thank you, Chair. I really wish we would keep this conversation about GVI and YGVI. There's a lot of crossing of the violence interrupters versus YGVI and GVI, and I think that's what's extremely confusing to community, because most of the questions I had to field this weekend was about people thinking interrupter services were being affected, and this has absolutely nothing to do with interrupters. I've made that point way too many times, but I think we have to just continue to clarify. But what I personally want to focus on is the reason why this amendment is stinking up the room for me is because of multiple reasons. One is the timing of this. I, too, receive messages and calls from vendors saying, hey, I just got my email and I'm not going to be selected. And I was in shock and trying to figure out, whoa, this is like a founder of this work. This is a person who I can't imagine doing this work without this person. What are we going to do? But I never once thought I should move the money somewhere and circumvent a process that we all know has happened. We all know the timing here. There was plenty of opportunity during budget, 2 weeks, 3 weeks before, when people moved Canopy out of this same department into the fire department if it was going so bad. I don't know why that didn't happen then. Totally understood the argument around Canopy, was happy to support it. I don't even know where this came from outside of receiving messages about certain vendors did not get the funding, and this is a new way to do it. The other thing that's super smelly, I mean, like this is like, it's just not working at all, because we didn't even have a discussion about this. I can't tell you how many discussions I've had with council members about why Canopy needed to be moved out of this department and how it fit better in the fire department. This just came out of nowhere. I literally found out about this from somebody walking up to me in the elevator and saying, "Council member, how have you heard what have you heard about one of your colleagues bringing an amendment forward that's going to move money out of this department and move it over to the county? If the county is doing so well at it, they have way more than we do, way more money than we do. If they're doing so well, they can find $1.25 million or whatever this new number is in their budget, and they can do it also. Also, what about these people who they haven't been notified of selection, or the selection isn't made public? Why can't they just go over to the county then? Let's move the whole program over there with the process, the legit process that's been put in place in the city that our staff did. Why aren't we considering that? Why are we starting a whole new process over if it ain't shady? People have been selected internally. People have not been selected and have been told public. Why are we starting a whole new process off over with another government agency that we don't know how they select? I feel secure in what our staff has told me in the past 6 months about what was going on with the selection process and who they were selecting and how they were selecting them. So why are we going around that suddenly, and now we're going to say, okay, let's just move the money over there and we'll let the county pick, and then we'll go along with who the county is picking? Are we doing, you shaking your head, Chair, is something else happening different than that? Because that's how I understand it. The way you're looking at me, it looks like something different is happening. Is something different happening?
So just the way I understand it, it's to move these programs over to the county, and which to be administered through a public and competitive process. But
we did that, is what I'm saying.
But so just earlier, we had staff tell us that that the RFP process for YGVI, like the vendors have been selected, and they are undergoing negotiation to enter into contracts with YGVI vendors, but not for GVI. Like what I heard was that notifications have not been.
No, but I'm saying we've completed a process. We've taken people through a process. Specifically, let's just speak to YGVI, because I think that's who I heard from was YGVI people that
Can I make
they
one
did
quick
not.
correction?
Okay.
Because I was just informed. I said that for GVI, Chair Chuck Tai, that they had completed the RFP process and notices were going out. I was corrected that they are actually in negotiation.
So both
are in negotiation.
Okay,
yes.
got it.
Okay, I thought that's what was said earlier. And then the other thing is, how are we certain that our vendors want to work with the county? I've heard people talk about the troubles that they've had working with the county as vendors also. Why are we just, why have we made a decision that they're better than us? I'm kind of not like that. I think I'm the best. So, like, how have we made a decision that the county is somehow better than us and they're going to do a better job at this and they have more experience than us, yet we've put all this money in investments around technical assistance with all these agencies to come in and help and make it better. We did all of that work last year, proud of all of that, but now we're saying, let's move this particular. What's going to happen when the RFP goes out for the violence interrupters, and then somebody's friend don't get selected, or somebody, whoever don't get selected? We gonna move that too?
That's not happening.
It's happening now.
But
it's happening now.
No, it's not.
We can play the game if we want to. I can say what I want to say. I know what's happening.
Okay.
and I know the timeline of what's happening. So what's going to happen when somebody's friend doesn't get selected for Violence Interrupters Group because there's a solid process in place?
Can we not ascribe motives?
To select.
Thank you.
Ascribe it to who? The universe? I didn't say anybody's name.
Councilmember, I don't think we should insinuate at all.
Oh, so
That-
we switch it up when it's
that-
me. It's ascribe motives every other time. Now it's insinuate. But when
that-
other people do stuff,
Councilmember,
y'all sit and listen to whatever. I done told you, I'm getting sick of it. When it's me, everybody got to have decorum. Everybody got to be in line. Only for me. This one next to me, yell out of turn, decorum. That's bad decorum. Whenever she feels like it, y'all don't say nothing. They do. Nothing. She talking right now. That's what I'm saying. Learn how to be leaders up in here. This is not showing leadership either. Everybody can see what y'all doing. Now, if you want to do it, do it. You're not going to do it with my vote, but do it. Or figure it out for the people who we really want to be doing this work. And this ain't the way to do it, period.
finally, I'll recognize Councilmember Osman.
Go ahead.
Councilmember Osman was in queue for me. I did want to ask a couple of clarifying questions. I'm pretty sure I know the answers to these, but can the authors remind me the timeline of this? How long do we expect this move to last?
Thank you, Councilmember Ellison. For the duration of 2025.
So we're already midway through February. This is less than a year. I wouldn't support a permanent move to the county because, you know, gang. I'm over here on the city side of things. Right. But yeah, this is less than a year. Which, you know, Councilmember Rainville, you talked about our need to help this department develop. You know, I still believe in that, but I think I support this move because we're talking about a limited scope, a limited timeline, and I do have a few other questions for the authors because it came up during discussion. But is the intention here to make sure that we do not interrupt continuity of service? Because I know it came up as a concern from other council members.
Yep. So again, thank you, Councilmember Ellison. For the motion, that's why we included that the agreement should outline the transition plan around, you know, addressing that disruption piece. Of course, we want to minimize any disruption. From our understanding, the county is already administering GVI, YGVI programs based in Minneapolis, and we'll be able to continue that work. So ideally, that information can be reflected in any agreement that's brought forward to council for approval.
Thank you. And if there's clarity, we're at committee right now. We still have another decision to make at full council. If there's questions that folks have for the authors, if there's discussions that need to happen between the authors and staff, I hope they can happen before full council because I'm going to support this today. But I also hope we can grow support and reach some kind of consensus before full council. I guess I don't even really know what the count is going to be today. But you know, I just feel like it's really important to say that. And I wanted to make a few other, I think, important points. You know, we're here getting into the weeds of like procurement and, you know, public purpose. And to me, just the whole discussion to me feels like just a massive lack of communication. I feel like I'm a little bit of beating a dead horse on that for the last year or so, but I just keep seeing it everywhere in the institution where if we've got vendors that don't understand our processes, my experience is that it's rarely malicious and that it is typically a matter of education. You know, we've got complaints, we've got we've got leadership transition in this department. Those things are not failures of our staff who are there. Our staff who are there are doing great to maintain, but it is a lot for folks to be taking on, especially in quick succession. I think having a reset, I think having some time to have a healthy, deep breath, if we take this opportunity and use it that way, is not the worst outcome in the world. And so that's one of the other reasons I'll be supporting this. And like I said, I think that those feelings of instability go way back within this department, go before some of the leadership change-ups, and now here we've just had another one. So I think this is an opportunity for us to invest in, to sort of allow some productivity and some rebuilding to happen. Last thing I'll say is, you know, I'll keep saying this until I'm gone, and you guys are, speaking of less than a year, I've got less than a year, but not 90% of this discussion should be happening between the authors and staff in, the commissioner's office. 90% of this discussion should be happening in a conference room, at the new building, or in a council member's offices. That's where 90% of this discussion should be happening. And if that's not happening, it's easy for council members to point the finger or for staff to point the finger at council members. That is a shared responsibility. Everybody's got to be working in equal parts to build that bridge. 90% of the discussion can't be happening up here on the dais. I know that might feel like that lends itself to transparency, but in my experience, it doesn't. It lends itself to a lot of confusion. It lends itself to a lot of conspiracy theories. It lends itself to a lot of speculation, and we've seen some of that reasonable speculation. And we've seen, I think, some reasonable speculation among colleagues up here on the dais. Again, but it leads to confusion. It leads to miscommunication. And so I would love for all of us to sort of be committed to sort of building that bridge. I know that there are ideological rifts among elected officials in this building. That is okay. I've seen it before. I've also seen council members, staff, the mayor be able to work through those ideological rifts, regardless of whether it's an election year, regardless of any of that. This is a temporary change. Let's not make it a bigger deal than that. And if it didn't come about in the most seamless way, let's fix our communication problems. I'm not just pointing the finger. I'm willing to be a part of whatever that solution needs to be. I'm willing to facilitate whatever meetings need to be facilitated. I'm willing to help build whatever bridges need to be built. But I just think, the constant way we have these discussions up here on this dais, it makes the stakes feel so much higher than they actually are. And so anyway, I feel like that kid in Lord of the Flies with the conch shell. But that's it. So that's my piece, and I hope we can get to some level of understanding by the time this comes to full council. But I do hope that we can support it, if for no other reason. I see it as a temporary move. I see it as a way for us to allow our departmental staff, who are going through a lot of transition, to have less to manage on their plate. I hear the discussion, but I think this move is reasonable, and I don't think we should make it bigger than what it feels like to me.
Thank you. Next, I'll recognize Councilmember Palmisano, followed by Councilmember Osman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be brief. I have a question. I think it's for Commissioner Barnett, but I'm open to anybody providing a sense of information. Commissioner Barnett, can you help us understand how long after this whole system was rebuilt, how long did it take to do the RFP and negotiate contracts with these vendors, like an approximation of months?
Hello again. So the drafting process started August 2024. That took 2 months of planning the RFP to ensure that the criteria is right, to ensure that we're asking the right information. We released the RFP. I have the timeline here. We released both RFPs Wednesday, October 16, 2024. The RFP closed on Friday, November 8, 2024. I usually say evaluations have to take a minimum of 4 weeks. Again, it depends on the number of proposals you receive, because we want to avoid reviewer fatigue and ensure that the first proposal is reviewed with the same clarity and, enthusiasm as the last one. And then once all reviewers wrap up evaluations, then we have to go over the review material and ensure that the procurement department agrees with the way that the evaluation was carried out. And then we have to start the negotiation process. So sometimes that includes a request for information, which is what we did with both these RFPs, because oftentimes the top scoring vendors aren't necessarily the vendors that are most equipped to do the work. And so we have to dig deeper to understand how their services align with the GVI model. And so that took a week for us to go through that request for information, including NNSC staff, including MPD leadership, including neighborhood safety staff. And now we're coming down to the negotiation of the budget. We want to ensure that the budget table is clear. It aligns with the public purpose doctrine, but also that there's a system so that we're not just awarding funds based on what is requested. We're awarding based on the referral system, right? And so we're able to award up to a certain amount based on what is funded. And then that process takes a while because the city attorney has to approve the budget table. Procurement has to draft the contracts. We have to get 4 signatures in total. And so again, this process started in August. We're currently in the negotiations phase. We'll be coming before council to ask to enter into contracts. And so that gives us 2 months remaining in order to finalize negotiations and execute the contracts by April 1st, 2025.
Thank you. So, Madam Chair, my point is this. It sounds to me like between 6 and 8 months is the time that it takes to put together one of these contracts, which to me makes what Councilmember Ellison said sound fairly unpractical to have it being done at the county, because after it is done at the county, mind you, in this resolution, it says that it will be coming back to this council to approve. So that puts us pretty far past summertime activity, and it puts a pretty significant gap in this work. This is not about continuity of work. To the other point, I would say I got this resolution after noon today. So if people want to rebuild a bridge or establish one in the first place, it's about building relationships, trusted relationships, and that feels pretty basic in terms of communication.
Thank you. So it's 3:33 p.m. right now. I will note that we have captioners until 4 p.m., so this discussion needs to be wrapped up by then. This committee needs to be wrapped up by that time. I see several council members in queue. I'll just ask that you keep your remarks brief so we can take up the underlying motion. I will recognize Council Member Osman.
Thank you. It seems like we are just fighting for scrums, like in a way for who's getting selected, who's not. What matters the most is, are this program helping the community? And are our departments being effective and have the tools to run the services we ask them to do? If they're failing that services, then yes, we have a right path to move forward to find Hennepin County or whoever to manage that. I remember last year, it was like $18 million budget departments, but they were struggling with staffing. They had like maybe one staff that was working with 100 contractors. So when it is challenging with them, yes, we can move that. And we also, for me, I would support temporary move, but it is challenging. I'm hearing mixed messages that this will impact violent interrupters program that are existing. You know, I'm hearing them, it might or it might not. So I like us to take a step back. There are programs, especially violent interrupters, that are doing a good work in our community, Minneapolis US program, that we actually are even looking for expanding those programs in different areas in our city. We want to make sure those are being met. And also, are those even getting the support they need or they deserve? Are their contracts being renewed? Are they getting paid? Those questions come up. So yes, we have the right to ask the right questions under the departmental leadership to make sure that we provide the tools they need to do their job better. But I would like us to, I would like to hear from the department before Thursday if the violent interruptions program will be impacted and what number would it not impact. Go ahead.
Just as a reminder, Deputy Director Lakes, before you chime in here, the question before the body is narrowly limited to GVI and YGVI programming. This is unrelated to violence interrupter services, unrelated to Minneapolis strategic initiatives work. And so, though I believe you were asked a similar question about this earlier by Councilmember Cashman, so I'll let you answer the question again. but just as a reminder, I know Councilmember Vita has been holding the reminders on this. We are narrowly speaking about GVI and why GVI in this topic.
Chair Tugtai, thank you. Council Member Osman, to very briefly repeat the same answer, it will impact violence interrupters because of the amount of money moving for GVI. So because we only have X amount of money, moving so much of that to Hennepin County will mean it will impact the violence interruption services, which are completely different, but the pot of money is going to be impacted. So those services will need to be reduced significantly.
So if that amount before Thursday, the author comes up a number that will not, would you able to give us a number that this will not impact those violent interrupters?
Chair Chugtai, Councilmember Osman, I can't discuss those numbers due to city rules because we're currently in the negotiation phase with the GVI contracts. So I can't share those numbers per city rules in procurement.
Well, okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, but yeah, it puts me in a tough position to make sure that I'm not voting on something that will impact programs that exist in our city, but at the same time, understanding that GVI is very important and maybe trying to contract with the county or move to the county and see how they work. It's something that we can think about, that we can entertain, that we can vote on it. But it puts me in a very challenging place. Hopefully before Thursday there is a clear number of if we move this amount of money, the programs that exist that I'm talking about, especially Minneapolis House, will not be affected. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I will recognize Vice Chair Koski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I was going to just ask for a timeline due to this, and so of a couple different questions. One was the actual dollars for GVI and why GVI, because my understanding is that the number that we have in this current motion is not correct. But you're also now telling me that you cannot, via city rules, give that to us. Is there a way that we could have our city attorney help us understand?
Chair Chugtai, Councilmember Koski, it might be something we have to get back to you on, but under the Data Practices Act, data that is submitted in response to an RFP is non-public until completion of the evaluation process, and that's a defined term in the statute. It's MnStat 13.591, and that is the point at which the information can be revealed public is when the government entity has completed negotiating the contract with the selected vendor. So while they're still in negotiations, most of the information is non-public.
Okay. And so how much longer do we feel negotiations is going to go on?
Chair Chugtai, Councilmember Koski, we are hoping to have that be done at the next February 18th meeting. We will be presenting that for council approval, so it should be done then.
Okay, so then at that time we would know the exact amount. Okay, the other question that I think is critical here right now is understanding the county and when it would be operational if we were to move these funds. I understand that that's not an answer for you. So I'm going to ask that before Thursday, if Councilmember Wansley, if you can work with the county and get a memo or some kind of written notice to help us understand their process. I am hearing the process that we have here at the city that took 6 to 8 months, and one of the major outcomes that we're trying to achieve here is to not have disruption of these services. And so I would just like to have in written format before we have this, their timeline of moving this funds and what that would look like as well. And then I know Councilor Chowdhury had to leave to go to the Capitol, and due to some of this unknown information, I would like to make a motion to approve without a recommendation today.
Councilmember Koski has moved to forward this item to Thursday's council meeting without recommendation. Mr. Clerk, I see. Go ahead.
Madam Chair, the motion to approve has been made and seconded.
Oh, right.
So it's not appropriate to make a motion to send forward without recommendation until and unless that motion were to fail.
Thank you.
Chair Chuktai, can I just be noticed for a comment just about this operational piece that Councilmember Chuktai, Councilmember Koski talked about, because I think we haven't really discussed or really recognized a piece of that, if I may.
Go ahead.
There is a significant piece of work that MPD does around data and shootings. And a significant part of the meetings that take place for GVI, right? So a significant amount of time. So no one has really discussed this move in terms of the work that MPD is doing going to our sheriff's department. And so I just say that because that's a piece that's significant to GVI and how we work those strategies. So that's just a point that I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we let's note that as a part of follow up here. Councilmember Vita, then Councilmember Chavez.
Thank you, Chair. Just one quick question. I wanted to just have someone list what the proven failures are. Like internally, what are the proven failures that's happened that has that is like rung this bell that we need to move it?
I believe that a list was provided in Councilmember Wansley's presentation. I don't remember it off the top of my head. Would you like her to address the question?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I just asked you.
Go ahead.
Councilmember Vita, yes, the presentation was a part of that, as well as the packet that's in front of you, along with that memo that's included in said packet that's also hyperlinked to a number of the things that council have attempted to do to address the number of issues that was outlined in that memo. I recognize it's short on time, so I won't go into every specific thing that's highlighted in that almost 7-page memo.
Okay, she literally said nothing. So because people's invoices didn't get paid on time, because council members think the county is better at, some council members think the county is better at it. I mean, the things I've gathered, I just don't know how we ensure that there won't be similar challenges at the county. The county board oversees their funding just like we do over here. I feel like I trust my money more where I have oversight at it, especially where somebody try to get themselves a 50% raise. I'll take my chances on overseeing my money before I take my chances on it going over there. So I'm really just trying to understand the specifics. I really don't recall like the specifics. So I'll find it and I'll ask more questions up until Thursday.
Thank you. And then finally, I'll recognize Councilmember Chavez.
Thank you, Chair Chuktai. If we can have staff, because I'm not hearing a number. How much money was funded for YGVI and GVI in the 2025 budget? There has to be a specific number. Why is there no number? That doesn't make sense. There has to be, when we approve funding, there's funding for everything.
Chair Chuktai, Councilmember Chavez, the funding that is in the budget is not down to the program level. And then when we enter contract negotiations for a body of service, we cease to be able to say how much money is there. So during contract negotiations, we cannot share the amount of money being negotiated.
For sure. And I understand. I'm not asking about the contracts. I'm talking about we approved a budget.
Yep.
And I'm confused why there isn't funding allocations for specific programs.
Chair Chugtai.
Like, is it not in the base budget, or what?
Budgeting does not go down to the program level at that time. When we enter negotiations for contracts for services, that's when we carve out based off of money that gets moved, staffing changes, how much money we are putting aside for training. There's an amount of money that we have to decide what goes where based off of the needs of the city. When we enter negotiations, we cannot share that number.
For sure, and I'm not asking for the number with negotiations, but I think this brings a bigger conversation about how we do budgeting in the city, and I think that's something that I will follow up with a budget leadership, because I feel like oftentimes throughout our budget process, and this is not just related to NSD or OCS, like this happens, and our budget process isn't as transparent. Not a budget process, but the budget itself isn't as transparent. You go through the budget book, you don't see exactly what staff is going to be using for what, and I feel like there needs to be deep structural change in the city's budget, and I think this is raising alarms for myself. I bet it's raising alarms for my residents, and that's why I'm asking those questions, because it is concerning that there isn't a specific amount of money that is being used for YGVI or GVI in the city's budget.
Chair Chugtai and Councilmember Chavez, there is a specific amount of money that is being used for that program.
Okay.
I cannot share that information.
I'm not asking you to share how much money that's being used for the contracts. I'm asking why isn't there a specific amount that was approved for this program in the budget? And I'm not sure why I can't have access to that number. When I ask staff questions about how much money is being used for the Ownership and Opportunity Fund, they can direct me and tell me how much money is being used for the Ownership and Opportunity Fund next year. If I ask them how much money is being used for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which was different this year because it was a line item, I obviously can have access to that number. I'm just confused why there isn't a number for this.
Chair Chugtai, Councilmember Chavez, after the contract negotiation is done, we can tell you how much is budgeted.
For sure. And I guess we're just going to cross hairs over here. This is not a you question, so I'll just let it go on that part. I think that just means deeper conversations through the city's budgeting process, because this is very concerning in general. And I think that we need to structurally change the way we do budgeting in Minneapolis so residents know what they're paying for and what they're getting out of it.
Chair Chugtai, Councilmember Chavez, the only thing it's not a line item.
For sure.
So there's a certain pot of money for those programs, and the department then kind of allocate. It's not that after negotiation are done, you won't know the amount. The department kind of gives estimates within their department to figure out, here's where we're going to spend money, here. It's not a line item in your budget to mark, if that makes sense.
And I get how this works. Okay. I'm just saying it continues to raise alarm bells about how we do things in the city and any structural change. That is it.
All right, colleagues, we're at 3:50 p.m. 10 minutes now left. Councilmember Wansley, then Councilmember Vita.
Yep. Thank you, Council Vice President Chugtai. I just want to reiterate to the public again, I know we've honed in our conversations about contract administration, but I do want to reiterate, Council has been provided a substantial packet that highlights the memo that we sent to the administration on April 17, 2024, that outlines, if you read through it, the number of issues from financial mismanagement to lack of compliance with guiding policy frameworks, to poor intra-city and government coordination, which I think also was put on display even now with the question of how can we coordinate with Hennepin County around GVI and even MPD. Right now under GVI in the county, there are weekly meetings in which MPD and the city are supposed to be at, where data is exchanged. So I don't understand how the commissioner came forward and shared confusion around that. Those meetings are happening. We're supposed to be present, and that's supposed to administer and inform how GVI and why GVI services are administered, if we are maintaining a consistent presence there. In addition to that, again, the memo highlighted credibility issues with both local and national stakeholders and partners. So The failures, again, are highlighted there. I've also will work with our county partners to address some of the requests of information around how their processes are going as it pertains to RFPs, and to get that information ahead of Thursday. And with that, also, I absolutely hear the concerns around structural budget needs for NSD. I think, again, that begs the question of how we need to be thinking through how we make this these programs more financially sustainable going forward. So with that, I do recognize it's timely for us to basically wrap this up, and we'll call to question.
Council Member Wansley has called the question. All right. Is there a second to her motion? I'm not hearing one. I'm going to recognize Councilmember Vita.
Thank you, and thank you, colleagues. My question is quick. I think I need to reframe my question. My question isn't what does Councilmember Wansley think has gone wrong with this department. My question is, where is data to support that something is wrong with this department? I got the memo. I read it. I saw the slides. But that's Councilmember Wansley's interpretation of what she thinks is wrong in this department. I'm trying to find out what has happened. What can this administration, meaning the staff who works here, what has happened that shows something is wrong?
Seeing no further discussion on the motion to approve item number 4, Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Payne.
Aye.
Wansley.
Aye.
Rainville.
No.
Vita.
No.
Ellison.
Aye.
Osman.
Aye.
Cashman.
No.
Jenkins.
Nay.
Chavez.
Aye.
Chowdhury is absent. Palmisano.
No.
Vice Chair Koski.
Nay.
And Chair Tugtai.
Aye.
There are 6 ayes and 6 nays.
That motion fails. I will recognize Vice Chair Koski to make the next motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to make a motion to move this for approval without recommendation.
Vice Chair Koski has moved to forward this item to the Thursday council meeting without recommendation. Is there a second?
Second.
Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Councilmember Payne.
Aye.
Wansley.
Aye.
Rainville.
No.
Vita.
No.
Ellison.
Aye.
Osman.
Aye.
Cashman.
No.
Jenkins.
Nay.
Chavez.
Aye.
Chowdhury is absent. Palmisano.
No.
Vice Chair Koski.
Aye.
And Chair Tugtai.
Aye.
There are 7 ayes and 5 nays.
That motion carries. This item is forwarded to Thursday's council meeting without recommendation. With that, colleagues, we've completed all business to come before this committee today, and without objection, we stand adjourned.